Well, hello. My name is Anngelle Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm feeling much better now, besides a little lower back pain, but that's what happens when you get old. My name is Anngelle Wood. This is a true crime podcast, Crime of the Truest Kind. New England crime stories. Oh, it's so fun digging into these stories. I am one of those people who truly loves the place that I have grown up and lived in my entire life. That would be New England, raised primarily in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Two wonderful places that you should visit if you were thinking about it. The Patreon for the show in full effect with new patrons. Thank you very much. Sandy with an I, Patty from New Hampshire, Total Gems in the Total Gem tier, and brand new holy shit superstar, Lisa MC. Wow, easies, huh? Thank you. You rock. Top tier there, girl. crimeofthetruestkind.com for ways to support the show. The link to the merch store. I have a holiday event coming up. You are all welcome to come say hello. Thursday, December 8th, Faces Brewing in Malden, Massachusetts. It's my annual gift drive for DCF Wonder Fund supporting local foster families. So I ask anybody who attends to bring an unwrapped gift for a child of any age, 0 to 18. Whatever you think a little one would like for the holiday. Or a medium one. Or an 18-year-old one. Please give the show a follow and a rating and review. I'd love to get some more great reviews. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the prime spots where you can leave a review. Thank you. All right, a lot of true crime news breaking the last couple of weeks. Of course, you know by now that someone has been arrested in the Delphi murder case. There's still so much more work to be done there. My heart goes out to the families because in the true crime world, everybody thinks that they're a fucking detective and they're going to solve the case. Let's please not add any more pain and suffering to what these families are already going through. Additionally, the same day as the Delphi, Indiana case press conference here in Massachusetts, where I am, another huge story broke. We learned the identity of the Lady of the Dunes, a murder victim found 48 years ago in Provincetown. She was found in the summer of 1974, and no one has known her identity until now. This is episode 35, Ruth Marie Terry, the Lady of the Dunes, Provincetown, Massachusetts. Provincetown is like the Emerald City, with winding sand-lined roads leading you into the magical coastal resort town. It's a tiny village, narrow streets, the reward at the end of the Yellow Brick Road, with a year-round population of less than 4,000 people. In the summer, though, Provincetown grows to more than 60,000, and even that number sounds low to me. It's a tourist town, P-Town, known for its extraordinary views, beaches, art, shops, celebration, and haven for the LGBTQ plus community. People come for many reasons. The work, it's a massive tourist attraction, and there are a lot of seasonal jobs in hospitality. Escape, P-Town is a conclave for arts and culture. Self-expression, Provincetown has been a safe haven for gay and queer and trans folks for decades. It's Pride at 11. Lots of cool folks make P-Town home. Ryan Murphy, he's a resident. He makes American Horror Story. Last season was set in P-Town, looked beautiful on screen. He also did the Dahmer thing on Netflix. Comic Judy Gold is in P-Town now. I think Leah Delaria lives there. A lot of the big names in literature made Provincetown home, like Tennessee Williams and Norman Mailer and Kurt Vonnegut. Well, I think Vonnegut lived in Barnstable, but, you know. Ryan Landry of Gold Dust Orphans fame, and John Waters spends time there. I have friends who have a lovely B&B, the Gas Lamp. If you need a place for Bear Week, you better book now. I love P-Town for all of the reasons you think, but also you can drive there and you don't have to take the ferry. The ferry can be an ass pain, and it's full of sights and sounds, beautiful landmarks. Oh, and the lobster pot. A famous spot on Commercial Street. I spent my birthday there last year. I love it. Maybe more than the islands, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, because it's quaint and it's comfortable, and I find it a lot less snobby than the islands, and it's easy. And you don't need to get on the ferry to enjoy Provincetown, or Truro, or Wellfleet, or Harwich, or the many beautiful towns that make up the Cape. Back in the summer of 1974, Ted Bundy was a full-blown serial killer. We just didn't know it yet. He was very busy abducting and murdering women in suburban Seattle that summer. In July of that year, America had its first live, on-air suicide. Christine Chubbuck, a news reporter in Sarasota, Florida, became the story when she pulled out a gun during her live report and shot herself. She lived for 14 hours, and naturally, the nation was shocked. Also that summer, newspaper heiress Patricia Hearst was kidnapped from her Berkeley, California apartment by the Liberation Army, and then she later participated in a bank heist with the group. That was the first time I heard the phrase Stockholm Syndrome. Richard Nixon had resigned as president, and Michael Dukakis was running for governor of Massachusetts for the first time. Faye Dunaway had married Woofa Goofa himself, Peter Wolf of the J. Giles Band. And Jaws, one of the best movies to ever be made, was filming in Martha's Vineyard. But there was a much bigger story on the Cape that summer. On July 26, 1974, on the outermost point of Provincetown, in a spot on a secluded road near Dunes Edge Campground, about 1 mile from Race Point Ranger Station, inside the Cape Cod National Seashore, a 12-year-old girl was hiking with her parents out to the fishing shack. And one of the dogs that was among the group had caught a scent, and the girl followed. That girl, Leslie Metcalf, found a body in the brush, but she didn't know it was a human at first. She thought maybe it was a deer. Leslie went to her parents, and they made their way to locate a park ranger and bring them out. What they found was the remains of a woman in the sand of scrub pines. She'd been there for a while. At least a week, but probably longer. My dogs are snoring right behind me. Can you hear that? Her hands were missing, removed by the killer to impede identification. No fingerprints to complicate things in 1974. Her head was nearly severed from her body, and the left side of her skull was crushed, but no weapon was found at the crime scene. She was described as white, 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 8 inches. Difficult to determine due to the very deep neck wound, making it impossible to know for sure. Her naked body was lying on half a beach towel, as if she'd been sharing it with someone, her head resting on a folded pair of Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana, almost like a pillow. Whoever killed her could not have cared about her comfort, unless it was some kind of punctuation to the violence. Leslie Metcalf died in 1996, never knowing who that woman was. Her sister Elisa would tell the Cape Cod Times that the girls learned that the woman was buried in Provincetown, and they would visit her gravesite. It's comforting to know that the girls were thinking of her, even though they never knew her. And there was another woman, Sandra Lee, an author now, who claims that she found the lady as she was walking with her dog a couple of days before Leslie found the body and reported it. I was confused as the local news stations here in Massachusetts were interviewing this person, Sandra, who claims that she saw the body and her injuries, but was too afraid to tell anyone. So for me, and most other people who refer to this case, Leslie Metcalf is credited for the discovery, as grim as it is. The crime scene was strange. I would imagine any site of a violent killing would be. They found her lying on one side of a green towel, that pair of dungarees with a bandana as a pillow. Is it possible for someone to want to comfort someone after such a brutal attack? I don't understand it. And her hands were gone, but where her hands should have been were piles of pine needles. The killer failed, as it was clear they attempted to remove her head, and would have taken that too. But they did succeed in pulling out several of her teeth. There were also signs of sexual assault. The Lady of the Dunes, as she would be known for the following 48 years, would remain a mystery. It was determined that she had extensive and expensive dental work among the teeth that remained. That's where police were hopeful it might lead to learning her identity. She had 7 gold crowns, worth about $5,000 to $8,000 at the time. Dental records were sent out nationwide, but no dentist ever responded with information leading to a match. Police got to work. Bloodhounds were brought in to search the area where she was found. Missing persons reports were looked into. Registers at the many hotels and boarding houses and motels nearby were checked. Beach permits checked. Police followed any lead. Dental records are usually the most reliable way to identify the departed, and those thousands of dentists were asked about her crowns, and nothing. Though some of her teeth had been removed by the violent killer, that led to one of the many theories, that Whitey Bulger is responsible. And hold that thought. There are 48 years worth of theories. The wound on her neck was so violent and so severe that she was nearly decapitated. The weapon is believed to be a military entrenching tool. It looks like a short shovel, and if this is in fact what was used to murder her, it would have to have some heft to it. It would have been what caused the massive trauma to her skull. The lady's estimated date of death was from several days to 3 weeks. 3 weeks earlier was the big 4th of July weekend, where every inch of the Cape and Islands is crawling with people. Would it be possible for her to have been there in that spot for that long undetected? One report of her death said, oddly, the gruesome crime scene became the single most visited tourist attraction in Provincetown during its peak season in the summer of 1974. Not so odd. People have had a morbid fascination since the beginning of time. I find nothing odd at all. Also, I am me, and I have driven around several notable places just to see the area. I don't walk in the yard or poke in the windows. I guess I am respectfully fucked in the head, I suppose. Provincetown Chief of Police, James Meads, who was chief when the body was found in the dunes, had her skull reconstructed by an anthropologist, then took it to a local artist to make a sketch of what she would look like. Copies were distributed around the country with the hope that a loved one would see it and recognize their mother or their sister or their neighbor or friend. Again, there was no response. Was anyone looking for her? Or was the resemblance just not very close? There was a P-Town psychic who got rather specific. The victim was a nurse from Ottawa, Canada. She was Marilyn or Carolyn O'Leary. Police reached out to the Canadian authorities. Information that went nowhere again. Chief Mead shared his frustration that the case remained unsolved in a 1983 interview with the New York Times. Of course he wanted to know who killed her, but he was more fascinated by who she was. Respectfully, he wanted to give her a name and a history. He had hoped to answer those questions before he retired from the police force, which he did in 1992. A lifelong Provincetown resident. He passed away on Christmas night, 2011, at 78, never having been able to learn who she was or why someone would have done what they did to her. She is buried at St. Peter's Cemetery on Jerome Smith Road in Provincetown. Her final resting place is marked with a headstone that reads, "Unidentified female body, found at Race Point Dunes, July 26, 1974. She was buried there, many locals believe, because of Chief Meads. He allowed her a final resting place. The lady, as I have taken to calling her as we work our way through the facts of her story, the lady was exhumed in 1980 and again in 2000, with the hope that modern science could help in identifying her and maybe her killer. On March 23, 2000, that small grave marker at St. Peter's Cemetery was moved, so the Lady of the Dunes remains could be visited once again to harvest DNA material. Police concluded that at the time of her murder, her killer wanted to foil any attempt at identity, hers and theirs. It was many, many years before forensic DNA would become a key in solving crimes. Back in 2000, the Barnstable County District Attorney said then, "If we can get a match with DNA, this will be a big break in the case. We figure out who she is, then we'll start to work figuring out who did it." Philip A. Rollins, the DA at the time, didn't get to work on that. He retired in 2002 and passed away on Christmas Day 2005 at the age of 70. He served as district attorney for 8 terms. That's a span of 32 years. On March 24, 2000, the Lady of the Dunes was reburied, and the headstone was replaced, identifying her only as the female body that was found at Race Point Dunes on July 26, 1974. Everyone in the Outer Cape for sure hoped for developments in her case. The Lady of the Dunes has been the oldest unidentified deceased person in Massachusetts history. There was simply nothing to go on. And her case remains an unsolved homicide. A cold case, until now. Provincetown police, many of whom declined to talk about the case over the years, did much of the early legwork. One detective, Warren Tobias, told the Boston Globe several years after her murder, "I don't believe she was a poor innocent." A poor innocent? Might he be suggesting that she is somehow to blame for her own murder? I'm not sure how to take that. And Chief Meads was described as a man who pursued this case like a bulldog with a lockjaw. And that's kind of disturbing to me as a mother of 3 bulldogs, whom you can hear snoring behind me right now as I read this to you. I did learn, though, that it meant a lot to the chief to learn who she was and who killed her. A few years after her discovery, Detective Tobias and Chief Meads began to suspect the unidentified woman was Rory Jean Kessinger, a local 24-year-old woman from Pembroke, Massachusetts, who'd been arrested in 1973 in Plymouth County. She pulled a gun on the cops on a few occasions and was said to have robbed banks. I don't know about you, but Rory Jean sounds pretty badass. An outlaw. She was charged with 2 counts of assault with intent to murder and sent to Plymouth County Jail. But Rory wasn't going to wait around. Sometime during the evening of May 26, 1973, or in the wee hours of that morning, she broke out using a hacksaw blade that someone had smuggled into the jail for her. She went to the window of the laundry room, tied a bunch of sheets together, and hacked at the window bars until she could squeeze through. She lowered herself out of the window to freedom. As her getaway waited, someone had to have been there waiting for her, because Rory Jean Kessinger was never seen again. And it's sad that you can still see the old hack marks in the bars where she made her jailbreak. Given this knowledge, Rory Jean Kessinger came to the minds of Provincetown police once the woman's body was found in the dunes. It was within the realm of possibility that Rory Jean Kessinger's physical characteristics could be a match. They suspected she might be the one local lore had begun to call the Lady of the Dunes. The lady's body was first exhumed to extract blood samples and to access her skull to create an artist's rendering of her face. Blood tests were done and proved inconclusive, while police did see a resemblance between the sculpted bust and the photographs of Rory Jean. Photos that I have posted on the webpage and in the Instagram feed at Crime of the Truest Kind. Rory hasn't been seen or heard from since her 1973 jailbreak, and her mother, it is said, hadn't seen her since she was 15 years old. My math tells me that was 1964. In 1999, the FBI approached Rory's mother about providing a DNA sample in an attempt to bring both mysteries to a close. Those initial results were inconclusive, and it left the theory open. 3 years later, in 2002, FBI agents tried again. This time, there was one conclusive answer. The test proved that Rory Jean Kessinger was not the Lady of the Dunes. It answered at least one question, even if it would create many more. Rory Jean Kessinger disappeared into the night in May 1973, leaving questions only she can answer. Was she an outlaw badass? Was she a criminal mastermind? Was she stupidly brave, as one officer put it? Is she dead? Is she living? We know she did have some aliases, but no one knows what happened to Rory Jean Kessinger. And if I'm close to right, she would be 73 today? I'm going to look into it. Where in the world are you, Rory Jean Kessinger? The Lady of the Dunes was found on July 26, 1974, and she would be identified publicly 48 years later. On Monday, October 31st, 2022, the FBI held a press conference to announce that the lady had been identified. Boston Special Agent in charge, Joseph Benevolenta, made the announcement.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm Joe Benevolenta, the Special Agent in charge of the FBI Boston Division, and I'm pleased to be joined by Massachusetts State Police Colonel Chris Mason, Provincetown Police Chief Jim Golden, Cape and Islands District Attorney Michael O'Keefe, and First Assistant United States Attorney Josh Levy. We are standing here today to announce that after nearly a half-century of investigative efforts, we have identified the oldest unidentified homicide victim in Massachusetts, known as the Lady of the Dunes. She is Ruth Marie Terry from Tennessee, who was just 37 years old at the time of her death. The FBI identified Ruth using investigative genealogy. This is a unique method that can generate new leads for unsolved homicides, as well as help identify unknown victims. This is, without a doubt, a major break in the investigation that will, hopefully, bring all of us closer to identifying the killer. Earlier this morning, FBI special agents and victim specialists, along with troopers from the Massachusetts State Police, delivered the news to the victim's family, and we would like to ask all of you to respect their privacy at this time. On July 26, 1974, Ruth was found deceased in the dunes about a mile east of Race Point Ranger Station inside the Cape Cod National Seashore in Provincetown, Massachusetts. At the time, the cause of death was determined to be a blow to the head and is estimated to have occurred several weeks prior. The victim's hands were missing, presumably removed by her killer so she could not be identified through fingerprints, and her head was nearly severed from her body. It was a brutal death, and for the last 48 years, investigators with the Massachusetts State Police and Provincetown Police Department have worked tirelessly to identify her through various means, including neighborhood canvasses, reviews of thousands of missing persons cases, clay model facial reconstruction, and age regression drawings. Since this crime was committed, many investigative and scientific techniques have either improved or been created through new advances in technology. One of these methods is investigative genealogy, which combines the use of DNA analysis with traditional genealogy research and historical records to generate investigative leads for unsolved violent crimes.
The entire press conference runs about 20 minutes or so, and it's very interesting, and there's a lot of information there. I linked it at the Crime of the Truest Kind YouTube channel. Ruth Marie Terry, answering that one question created so many more. Authorities tried on numerous occasions to determine her identity. Those exhumations, creating the busts that could be recognized by someone, all that work led to the announcement we got on Halloween Day. Science identified this murder victim, a victim of a very violent crime. By now, we have learned more about genetic genealogy. Real-life cases are being solved with science. It is how investigators were able to finally learn Ruth's identity. We have come to familiarize ourselves with the science of solving crimes. Many of us, with even a passing interest in crime stories, became familiar with the language when Joseph DeAngelo was identified as the Golden State Killer in 2018. Shocking just about everyone when it was revealed who he was and how they found him. He was the man whose identity was a mystery, chronicled in Michelle McNamara's book and the HBO documentary I'll Be Gone in the Dark. He is now serving life in prison after being convicted for the crimes attributed to the Golden State Killer, responsible for more than 50 rapes and 12 murders across California through the 1970s and 1980s. For over 40 years, his identity has been a mystery, until DNA made the connection. On August 21st, 2020, a geriatric Anngelle was sentenced to an absolute maximum penalty allowed by law. 11 consecutive sentences and several more years added for additional charges and enhancements. Life without the possibility of parole for crimes he admitted to. Same goes for the Bear Brook murders, sometimes referred to as the Allenstown Four. The bodies of a woman and 3 girls were found in 2 barrels at Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire, 15 years apart. The first 2 bodies were found stuffed in a barrel in 1985. The other 2 were found in a barrel in the same area in 2000. There was a lot to this story. Like, were they there the whole time? And I know many of you have requested that I cover that story. All 4 remained unidentified for decades, until 2019, when 3 of the 4 victims were identified through DNA testing and genetic genealogy. Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, 24, and her 2 daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn, 6, and Sarah Lynn McWaters. She was said to be a year old. One of the children, the 4th girl, she remains unidentified. She is, investigators believe, the biological daughter of a man named Terry Rasmussen. He is believed to be the killer of all 4 of the bodies that were found in the barrels. Rasmussen died in prison in 2010, serving time for killing Eunsoon Jun, a woman he was dating in California who went missing in 2002. Ruth Marie Terry was brought back to life in our minds through investigative genealogy. It is a unique method that can generate new leads for unsolved homicides, as well as help identify unknown victims, just like Special Agent with the Boston Bureau of the FBI, Joseph Benevolente, told us in the press conference. Now, new work is underway. Investigators turn their attention to the steps that include learning more about her, as well as working to identify who is responsible for her murder. There are generations of investigators who've worked on Ruth Marie Terry's case, many of whom are no longer with us, like Chief Meads, and many others who were children when she was killed. Ruth Marie Terry was born in Tennessee in 1936. She was a daughter, she was a sister, she was an aunt, she was a wife, and we think a mother. She had connections to California, to Massachusetts, and to Michigan. We don't know yet what brought her to the Cape, but we hope to find out. Given the 48 years that this murder has gone unsolved, theories abound. Tony Costa, the infamous Cape Cod killer, is always implicated, despite that he was dead when Ruth Marie Terry was murdered in 1974. Tony Costa, the Truro killer, hanged himself in prison in May of 1974. And yes, I do have a Tony Costa episode on the way. Another is serial killer Haddon Clark. He told The New Yorker during a 2000 interview he was visiting his grandfather's house in Wellfleet when he said, "Came across a beautiful girl in Provincetown and went into one of my episodes." Clark, who was 21 when Ruth Terry was killed, has also claimed to have murdered other people, including 9-year-old Sarah Pryor of Wayland, Massachusetts. She disappeared in October of 1985 when she went for a walk outside her family's home and was never seen again. Sarah and her family had only lived in Massachusetts for 6 weeks before she disappeared. With Clark's history of paranoid schizophrenia, the police would doubt his credibility. And according to the Cape Cod Times, they did bring him to Massachusetts to look for bodies he said he had buried here. No bodies were unearthed, but they did find a bucket of jewelry buried at his grandfather's house that he said came from his victims. Haddon Clark told police he killed at least 11 other women and buried some of them near his grandfather's home on the Outer Cape. The Clarks have a gruesome family history, as his brother Bradfield Clark is in prison after murdering Trish Mack, his co-worker, during a dinner invitation in 1983, and he cooked parts of her body on a barbecue grill and ate them. And the press loves to make them out to be competing psychopaths. For almost 50 years, theories have run wild about what happened to the Lady of the Dunes, like the connection to Haddon Clark suggesting he was on the Cape at the time of the Dunes murder. Haddon Clark is serving a 60-year sentence in Maryland for the murder of his 6-year-old neighbor, Michelle Dorr, who he killed and cannibalized in May 1986. In 1992, he killed Laura Houtling, the 26-year-old daughter of a woman he was working for as a part-time gardener. He had become obsessed with Laura. He raped and stabbed her to death and was caught within days after his fingerprints were identified at the scene. He confessed to Laura's murder and others going back to his teens. He got 30 years for each killing. Doesn't seem like nearly enough. And then there's Stephen King's son, Joe Hill. He floated the theory that the Lady of the Dunes was a woman from the set of the film Jaws that was filming on the Cape that summer. Yes, she's wearing blue dungarees. Yes, she has a blue bandana scarf on her head. Yes, she has long dark hair. All sort of uniform for the time. I watched Joe Hill talk about it in an interview, and it seems like a stretch to me. And one of the most notorious theories is associated with one of the most notorious killers from New England. That would be Whitey Bulger. Leads at the time suggested that the Lady of the Dunes was tied to notorious boss of the Winter Hill Gang, James Whitey Bulger. Episode 1 and 2 are about Whitey and his dirty deeds. Find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere you get podcasts. Whitey Bulger, who the Cape Cod Times will tell you had a gay-for-pay past and liked to hang out at the Crown and Anchor in P-Town. He was linked to a woman with a similar description to the Lady of the Dunes. Some coincidental things connect him. A size 10 shoe imprint found at the scene. Whitey had a size 10 shoe, as do a large number of the male population in the United States of America. A green towel that was found with the lady was suspected to be from the Crown and Anchor. Add to all of that he is a vicious killer. Did Bulger do it? Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. Whitey was a stone-cold motherfucker. Removing teeth was part of his MO. But it doesn't all add up. Whitey had his henchmen who would do his dirty work. It doesn't quite fit the work of Whitey and his Winter Hill thugs. But on the other hand, he liked to murder women. In May 2010, with the advent of new technology, another composite of the woman was created with the hope of discovering who she was. The new facial reconstruction images were created by forensic experts from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Smithsonian Institute. You may be wondering why no one was looking for a missing woman we now know as Ruth Marie Terry. Well, we now know they were. Family members were notified of her identification on the morning of Monday, October 31st. The public would be informed that afternoon via a press conference. Once she had been identified, her family members began to share information about their missing and murdered loved one. Ruth's life seemed to take a tragic turn after she married a man named Guy Moldovan in February of 1974. Her family described Ruth as a loving and caring person who was a free spirit who wanted to explore life outside of Tennessee where she grew up. She last visited her family 4 months before her body was discovered in Provincetown. Her grandniece, Brittany Novoglaski, told NBC 10 Boston, "It was just earth-shattering to know that somebody so beautiful and so loved and so bright was taken like that." She said her grandmother told her that Ruth just oozed love. And after almost 5 decades of living with the unknown, Ruth's family searched for her ends in the dunes of Cape Cod. Hundreds of miles from her roots in Tennessee, where she was born in 1936 in rural Marion County, to Johnny Terry and Eva Lois Keener. A death certificate will show that Ruth's mother died a year later of epilepsy. Investigative genealogy finally put a name to the composite face of the victim brutally murdered in Provincetown in 1974. And Ruth's family described the findings as very shocking and very, very sad, because she was up there for 50 years all by herself. Her grandniece said that her mother and her grandmother never stopped searching for Ruth, never knowing she was found in the dunes that day, or that she was buried in Provincetown for all this time. The last her family knew was that she was in California with her boyfriend, Guy Moldovan, who was now the focus of her murder investigation. According to a marriage certificate obtained by investigators, Ruth married Guy Moldovan in Reno, Nevada, 5 months before her body was discovered, in February 1974. Her family had met him the year before Ruth disappeared. He would prove to have a dark past Ruth's family would only learn about much later. Guy Moldovan, who had been married several times and used the aliases Raoul Guy Rockwell and Guy Moldovan Rockwell, first appeared in the news in April 1960, when his second wife, Manzanita Rockwell, 40, and her 18-year-old daughter, Dolores Mearns, disappeared from the dilapidated home they lived in Seattle, Washington, with Moldovan. He was operating an antique store in the building. Police searched the house 4 months later and discovered human remains of what appeared to be a young woman in a septic tank in the basement. And then he reportedly left Seattle. The 1960 disappearance and the presumed murder of his wife and his teenage stepdaughter in Seattle appeared in the news across the country. And accounts that painted Moldovan as a smooth-talking con man with an antique shop in Seattle, who'd stolen $10,000 from a relative, his third wife's mother, reportedly, and reinvented himself in the 1980s as a talk show host in Salinas, California, hosting a weekly radio show called Talk to Me. He was known to cover an array of topics, like violence in America, old people having sex, and taking listener calls. He was convicted in 1961 on what only appears to be the theft charges and sentenced to no more than 15 years. But in March 1962, a judge suspended the sentence if he paid the money back. He divorced Manzanita Rockwell in July of 1960, 3 months after she and her daughter vanished, on the grounds of desertion. He married a woman named Evelyn Emerson 8 days later. Moldovan found himself in it with Emerson's stepmother, Germaine Winkler, who accused him of taking $10,000 that she had lent him so he could buy Indian artifacts for his antiques business. This guy, huh? What a piece of work. One newspaper account reported that on August 6, 1960, Moldovan, calling himself Michael Strong, flew to Reno, Nevada, bought a sports car, and then drove across country to Provincetown, Massachusetts, where he passed himself off as a writer for a Vancouver newspaper and magazine. Bingo, there's some Providence connection, even though it is 14 years before Ruth is found murdered. He then went to New York City, got a nose job and an apartment under the Michael Strong alias. Now, according to the SF Gate, Moldovan was discovered in Greenwich Village and taken into custody for questioning. Based on newspaper reports from that time, it looks like homicide charges were never filed against him. The same conclusion was reached by famed crime writer Ann Rule, who wrote about the Moldovan case in her 2007 book, Smoke, Mirrors, and Murder. Ann Rule unknowingly was the first to report on Moldovan's marriage to Ruth Terry, noting the man married a woman named Terry in Washoe County, Nevada, before slipping out of the public eye. At the time of his arrest in the village, he had colored his hair red, had a new nose, and another fake name, but he denied killing his former wife and stepdaughter. Seattle prosecutors acknowledged that they had no evidence to support a murder charge against him. They were unable to identify the remains found in his home, or even say whether they belonged to one or the two victims. That is simply horrifying to me. So no one was charged with the murder of those two women. Cape and Islands District Attorney Michael O'Keefe and investigators are looking into details of the murders and have contacted officials in Seattle. Moldovan seemed to have kept a low profile after that, but marriage records in Nevada show that on February 16, 1974, he married Terry Marie Vazina in a civil ceremony in Reno. Terry Marie Vazina is reportedly one of Ruth's aliases. She had Terry Marie Vazina, Terry M. Vazina, and Terry Shannon. 5 months later, Ruth Marie Terry would be dead in the dunes of the Cape, and Guy Moldovan would be nowhere to be found. Massachusetts State Police, the Cape and Islands District Attorney's Office, and Provincetown Police announced they are seeking information about Moldovan and his whereabouts in 1973 and 1974. The agencies believed that they got married in February 1974, and both went by a number of names including Raoul Guy Rockwell, Guy Moldovan Rockwell, Terry Marie Vazina, Terry M. Vazina, and Terry Shannon. SF Gate newspaper archives uncovered even more details about Moldovan, who was born on October 27, 1923 in New Mexico. That made him 51 when Ruth was killed. After the 1960 manhunt made Moldovan infamous, investigators in Humboldt County in Northern California probed him as a suspect in a 1950 murder of a truck driver named Henry Baird and his teenage girlfriend named Barbara Kelly at the Table Bluff Overlook. A deputy in the sheriff's office told the Eureka Humboldt Standard that Moldovan had been a local resident, but may have left the area before the Table Bluff crime occurred. Man, there was a trail of death surrounding this guy. So, where is Guy Rockwell Moldovan now? Well, he's dead. He died in Salinas, California on March 14th, 2002. He was 78 years old, and he remains shrouded in mystery. Massachusetts State Police officially identified Guy Moldovan as a person of interest in this investigation. This is an open case, and anyone with information about either Guy Moldovan or Ruth Terry's whereabouts in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and New England from 1973 to 1974 is asked to call police at 1-800-CAPTURE, KAPTURE, or emailing msptips@pol.state.ma.us or by texting 226787. What an incredible story. And there's more to it. I really, truly hope that we can solve the murder of Ruth Marie Terry, Lady of the Dunes, Provincetown, Massachusetts, once and for all. Almost 50 years ago, she was murdered. It's just incredible to have an identification at long last. Thank you for listening. That concludes episode 35. All right. My name is Anngelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind, New England Crime Stories. I have a lot of fun digging into all this information, so thank you all for your continued support. I love hearing from you. crimeofthetruestkind.com. You'll find information about all the episodes, everything about the show there, the merch store, the Patreon link. You can email me, crimeofthetruestkind@gmail.com. Send me a DM. Keep your show ideas coming. I love them. Please support the show. Rate and review the show. 5-star reviews are the best. I run a monthly merch lottery. So if I get a rating and a written review, 5-star written review, I will put you in the lottery and send you some cool merch. I do not believe I will have a new episode for Thanksgiving week. So please look for a new episode the last week of November. I'm on a bi-weekly schedule, but Thanksgiving week is probably going to be a little bananas, as it is for a lot of us, right? Sending out extra special thanks to Lisa MC, Sandy with an I, Pat from New Hampshire. You are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful superstars, total gems. I love everything about you. Don't change. All right, until next time, I'll be back with more New England crime stories. Lock your goddamn doors.